The camera pans over a stunning cityscape where a towering skyscraper stands as a symbol of power and success. This is the headquarters of Graves Enterprises, a corporation that dominates the industry. The lens glides seamlessly through the building's glistening glass windows, capturing the hustle and bustle within. Phones ring, employees rush about, and polished executives hold intense discussions. At the very top floor, seated in a lavish office adorned with leather chairs and abstract art, sits Alexander Graves, the CEO. His tailored suit and gold cufflinks gleam under the soft glow of recessed lighting. Alexander radiates authority, but his smirk and piercing gaze reveal an undeniable arrogance. He thrives on control, commanding respect and fear with every word he speaks. Meanwhile, the focus shifts to the building's reception area, where the revolving doors spin open to reveal a man who looks completely out of place. David Kane, unshaven and wearing a weathered coat, steps hesitantly onto the polished marble floor. Heads turn, eyes narrow, and whispers ripple through the air. His clothes are tattered, his hair unkempt, but his gaze is sharp, carrying a quiet determination that cannot be ignored. He approaches the reception desk, his voice steady yet pleading. "I need to see Mr. Graves," he says, gripping the edge of the desk as if holding on to hope itself. The receptionist looks him up and down, her expression a mix of pity and disdain. "Do you have an appointment?" she asks curtly. David shakes his head. "No, but I used to work here. It's important. Please, just let me speak to him." She hesitates, her fingers hovering over the phone. A security guard steps forward, eyeing David warily. The receptionist leans in, whispering to a colleague, "Who is this guy?" The guard mutters under his breath, "Another one looking for a handout." David stands his ground. "I just need 5 minutes," he says firmly. Something in his tone gives the receptionist pause. Reluctantly, she picks up the phone and makes the call. Moments later, David is escorted to the elevator by two guards. The ride to the top floor feels endless. The camera captures his reflection in the mirrored walls, tired, worn, but unyielding. When the doors open, he steps into Alexander's pristine office. The space is vast, the view breathtaking, but David's focus is on the man seated behind the imposing mahogany desk. Alexander barely looks up from his laptop, his fingers tapping away at the keyboard. "What is this?" he asks dismissively, his voice dripping with irritation. One of the guards announces, "This man says he needs to speak with you." David takes a step forward, his voice trembling but resolute. "Mr. Graves, I used to work for this company. I dedicated years of my life here. Things went wrong for me, and I fell on hard times, but I just need a chance to start over." Alexander finally looks up, his cold blue eyes locking onto David. He leans back in his chair, a mocking smile playing on his lips. "You worked here?" he says, his tone filled with disbelief. "And now you expect me to, what? Hand you a second chance on a silver platter?" David pleads, his voice growing more desperate. "I know I look like nothing right now, but I can prove myself. All I need is one opportunity." Alexander chuckles, the sound sharp and cutting. "Do you have any idea where you are? This isn't some charity. This is the top of the food chain. People like you don't belong here." He gestures to the guards. "Get this man out of my office. I don't have time for sob stories." As the guards step forward, David doesn't resist. But before he's dragged away, he turns to Alexander, his gaze unwavering. "You'll regret this," he says quietly, his voice carrying a weight that makes Alexander pause for a fleeting second. The moment passes quickly, and Alexander waves dismissively, turning back to his laptop. The camera follows David as he's escorted out of the building. He looks back one last time at the tower that looms above him, his expression unreadable. The narrator's voice cuts through the scene, filled with foreboding. Alexander Graves thought he had silenced a beggar. What he didn't know was that this man held the key to his empire's fate. David Kane sat on a park bench, his shoulders slumped and his face shadowed by years of hardship. But his eyes told a different story. They carried a spark, a glimmer of determination that even life's cruelest blows couldn't extinguish. The narrator's voice echoes through the scene. David Kane wasn't always here. Once he was a man destined for greatness, a brilliant strategist and a cornerstone of Graves Enterprises. The camera fades into a flashback, revealing a younger, polished David, walking confidently through the glass halls of Graves Enterprises. Colleagues greeted him with admiration as he passed, their smiles genuine, their handshakes firm. David wasn't just respected, he was relied upon. His innovative ideas and strategic mind had brought the company millions in profits, elevating it to industry dominance. The scene shifts to a bustling boardroom. David stands at the head of the table, his presentation in full swing. Behind him, bold projections and charts fill the screen, detailing a revolutionary plan to reshape the company's future. This initiative, David explains, his voice steady and passionate, isn't just about staying competitive, it's about redefining the industry. The risks are calculated, and the rewards, they're limitless. The executives murmur in agreement, some even nodding. But at the far end of the table, Alexander Graves leans back in his chair, arms crossed, a faint smirk on his lips. He waits until David finishes before speaking. David, Alexander begins, his tone dripping with condescension. While your enthusiasm is commendable, this plan is reckless. We're here to make profits, not chase fantasies. The room falls silent, the air thick with tension. David, undeterred, counters, pointing to the data behind him. The numbers speak for themselves, sir. This isn't a gamble. It's a calculated move that could put us years ahead of the competition. Alexander's smirk deepens. Enough, he says, his voice cutting. We're not risking the company on your idealistic nonsense. David's face tightens as the executives exchange uneasy glances. The meeting ends abruptly, and David is left standing at the table, his confidence visibly shaken. The flashback shifts to David's office later that evening. He sits at his desk, flipping through his proposal, wondering where he went wrong. A coworker approaches, feigning concern. Tough meeting, huh? The man says, his voice oozing false sympathy. Don't worry, Graves will come around eventually. You just have to hang in there. David offers a weak smile, unaware of the betrayal brewing just beneath the surface. Days later, David is called into Alexander's office without warning. The atmosphere is cold and formal. Alexander sits behind his massive desk, holding a printed report. His expression is unreadable. David, he begins, it's come to my attention that sensitive company data was leaked to a competitor, and the evidence points directly to you. David is stunned. Sir, that's impossible. I would never... Alexander raises a hand, cutting him off. Don't insult me with your excuses, he says sharply. This company has no room for traitors. Pack your things. You're done here. The scene lingers on David's face, his devastation palpable. Security escorts him out of the building, past colleagues who avert their eyes, unwilling to meet his gaze. The narrator's voice returns. In a single moment, David Kane lost everything. His career, his reputation, his future, all shattered by a betrayal he never saw coming. Back in the present, Alexander Graves remains as arrogant as ever. The camera captures him in a high-stakes meeting with a major client. The client, visibly frustrated, raises concerns about Alexander's inflexible terms. We need more flexibility in these contracts, the client says firmly. Alexander leans back, smirking. If you don't like the terms, feel free to go elsewhere, he replies dismissively. The client gathers their documents and leaves, shaking their head. Alexander watches them go, unbothered. Their loss, he mutters. The narrator comments, Alexander Graves believed his empire was unshakable, but the cracks were beginning to show. Within the company, employees are quitting in record numbers. The HR manager bursts into Alexander's office with a stack of resignation letters. Sir, we've had over 30 resignations this month alone, she says urgently. Alexander barely glances up from his computer. Replace them, he replies curtly. The manager hesitates. These aren't entry-level positions. We're losing senior staff, people who've been here for years. Alexander finally looks up, his expression cold. Everyone is replaceable. If they want to leave, let them. The HR manager leaves, shaking her head in disbelief. In the break room, employees whisper about the toxic environment. He doesn't care about us, one says. We're just numbers to him. Another nods. I've already sent out my resume. This place isn't worth it anymore. At the same time, whispers of an anonymous investor buying company shares begin to circulate. Employees huddle in small groups, speculating about a potential takeover. During a meeting, Alexander's CFO brings it up cautiously. Sir, we've noticed unusual stock activity. Someone's acquiring significant shares. Alexander waves him off. Let them. No one can touch this company. We're untouchable. The narrator adds, Alexander's arrogance blinded him to the storm brewing right under his nose. The scene shifts to a quiet, upscale cafe. David Kane sits at a table with a group of well-dressed individuals, investors, lawyers, and financial advisors. Gone is the disheveled man who begged for a second chance. David is polished, confident, and fully in control. One investor speaks up. We've secured nearly 40% of the shares. Once we finalize the remaining acquisitions, we'll have majority control. David nods, his expression calm but resolute. This isn't just about taking over a company, he says. It's about rebuilding it with integrity. The narrator closes the act with a hint of suspense. David Kane was no longer the man Alexander threw out. He was building something far greater than revenge. He was building redemption. The camera opens on a chaotic scene inside Graves Enterprises. Phones are ringing off the hook, employees rush between cubicles, and tension fills the air. In a nearby conference room, a sales team is scrambling to salvage a key account. The team leader closes the call with a grim expression, turning to her colleagues. They're pulling out, she says flatly. That's our third client this week. The narrator's voice cuts in. For years, Graves Enterprises thrived under the illusion of invincibility, but cracks had begun to form, and now those cracks were threatening to shatter the entire structure. The scene shifts to Alexander Graves in his corner office, staring out the window with his usual air of confidence. His assistant enters cautiously. Sir, we've lost another client, Legacy Partners. They've terminated their contract. Alexander doesn't flinch. Without even turning around, he replies, Find another client to replace them. His assistant hesitates. Sir, it's not just Legacy Partners. 4 other accounts have left in the past 2 weeks. They're citing poor communication and rigid contract terms. Alexander finally turns to face her, his expression hard. Their loss, he says dismissively. We don't cater to weakness. If they can't handle our terms, they don't deserve our services. The camera lingers on Alexander's face as he sits back in his chair, the faintest flicker of doubt crossing his features. Meanwhile, the situation inside the company grows worse. Resignation letters pile up on the HR manager's desk, each one a reminder of the growing dissatisfaction among employees. The HR manager bursts into Alexander's office with a stack of papers. Sir, we need to talk. We've had over 40 resignations this month alone, and these aren't junior positions. We're losing senior staff, department heads, team leaders. If this continues, we won't have the resources to meet our commitments. Alexander barely looks up from his laptop. Replace them, he says curtly. Sir, that's not the solution, the manager presses. These are people who've been with the company for years. They're leaving because they feel undervalued, disrespected. Alexander finally looks up, his eyes cold. Loyalty doesn't exist anymore, he says. If they're too weak to handle the pressure, they're better off somewhere else. The HR manager leaves, shaking her head in disbelief. In the break room, employees huddle in small groups, whispering about their frustrations. I can't do this anymore, one says, setting down her coffee cup. He doesn't care about any of us. Another nods. I've already got an interview lined up. I'm not waiting for this place to implode. The tension reaches a boiling point when news outlets begin reporting on unethical practices within Graves Enterprises. A breaking news segment flashes across the screen. Graves Enterprises under fire. Reports suggest toxic work culture and questionable ethics. The camera pans to Alexander, watching the report in his office, his face turning red with anger. He slams the remote onto his desk, shouting, Who's behind this? Who's feeding them these lies? His assistant enters hesitantly. Sir, the board is requesting a meeting to discuss the situation. Alexander glares at her. Tell them I'll handle it. The media doesn't dictate how I run this company. The narrator interjects, but for all his bravado, Alexander Graves was losing control. The empire he built was crumbling, and he didn't know how to stop it. While Alexander's world spirals into chaos, the camera shifts to David Kane. The disheveled man who had once been thrown out of Graves Enterprises is now unrecognizable. In a montage, David is seen trading his tattered clothes for a sharp suit, his hair neatly styled. He walks into meetings with confidence, shaking hands with powerful allies. In one scene, he studies financial reports with a team of advisors, his sharp mind once again at work. The narrator's voice grows hopeful. David Kane was no longer defined by his fall. He was rising stronger than ever, preparing to reclaim everything that had been taken from him. The storytelling shifts back and forth, contrasting Alexander's downfall with David's ascent. In one scene, Alexander sits in a tense board meeting, his frustration palpable as board members question his leadership. "The stock price is dropping, Alexander," one member says. "Investors are nervous. We need a strategy." Alexander clenches his fists. "The stock will recover," he growls. "I built this company from the ground up, and I won't let anyone tell me how to run it." Meanwhile, David meets with his investors in a quiet, upscale cafe. "We've secured 51% of the shares," one of them reports. "We have controlling interest." David nods, his expression calm but determined. "It's time," he says. The camera captures Alexander in his office late at night, staring at his computer screen, the stock price glaring back at him like a taunt. His once pristine empire feels hollow now, the weight of his decisions pressing down on him. The narrator's voice carries a note of foreboding. Alexander Graves thought he could control everything, but the storm was already at his doorstep. The act ends with David standing outside Graves Enterprises, looking up at the towering building. The camera zooms in on his face, calm, resolute, ready. The narrator concludes, David Kane wasn't seeking revenge. He was seeking redemption, and the time had come to take back what was rightfully his. The scene opens with Alexander Graves pacing the length of the boardroom. His sharp, polished shoes echo against the floor, a stark contrast to the tension hanging in the air. The once unshakable CEO now wears an air of frustration, his usual confidence replaced by visible stress. Around the long table, board members exchange uneasy glances. Charts and documents lie scattered before them, all pointing to the same grim reality. The company is on the verge of collapse. Alexander finally stops, placing both hands on the table. His voice, though commanding, wavers slightly. "We need to address this head-on," he begins. "The media attacks, the stock price drop, the client losses. It's all temporary. I've steered this company through worse, and I'll do it again." A board member speaks up, his tone cautious but firm. "With all due respect, Alexander, the situation feels different this time. The stock price hasn't just dipped. It's plummeting. Investors are panicking. We need decisive action." Alexander glares at him, his temper flaring. "Decisive action?" he snaps. "You think I haven't been decisive? I built this company from nothing, and I'll be the one to save it." As the tension in the room builds, the sound of the double doors creaking open silences everyone. Heads turn toward the entrance. Standing in the doorway is David Kane, dressed in a tailored suit, his posture confident, his expression calm yet purposeful. The contrast between the polished figure before them and the disheveled man Alexander had thrown out months ago is staggering. The boardroom falls silent. David steps inside, his footsteps measured and deliberate. Alexander's face twists in disbelief. "What is the meaning of this?" he demands, his voice sharp. David stops at the end of the table, locking eyes with Alexander. His tone is steady but carries a quiet authority. "Good to see you again, Mr. Graves," he says. "Though I imagine this isn't how you thought we'd meet next." A murmur ripples through the boardroom as the members look between David and Alexander, trying to piece together the situation. One member finally speaks. "Who are you and why are you here?" David smiles faintly, placing a portfolio on the table. "Allow me to introduce myself properly," he begins. "My name is David Kane. I used to work here. Some of you might even remember me. But today, I'm not here as an employee. I'm here as the majority shareholder of Graves Enterprises." The room erupts in shock. The board members exchange stunned glances, whispering among themselves. Alexander's face contorts in anger. "This is absurd," he shouts. "You expect us to believe you, of all people, own a controlling stake in my company?" David remains unshaken. "It's not absurd. It's a matter of public record. Over the past few months, I've worked with a group of investors to acquire a controlling interest in Graves Enterprises. As of yesterday, we hold 51% of the shares. A wave of realization washes over the room. One board member flips through the portfolio David handed out, confirming his claim. He's telling the truth, the member mutters, his voice barely audible. David continues, his voice growing firmer. I'm not here for revenge, Mr. Graves. I'm here to fix what you've broken. This company was built on innovation and integrity, but under your leadership, it's become a toxic, stagnant shell of what it used to be. That ends today. Alexander slams his fist on the table, his face red with fury. You can't do this. This is my company. I made it what it is. David meets his gaze unflinching. And now it's mine. The board has already been informed of my intentions. Effective immediately, you're being removed from your position as CEO. The silence in the room is deafening. Alexander looks around, searching for support, but the board members avoid his gaze. The realization settles over him like a crushing weight. His empire is no longer his. The scene shifts to the office floor, where whispers quickly turn to cheers as news of Alexander's removal spreads. Employees who had endured years of his harsh leadership celebrate openly. Finally, someone's standing up to him, one says, clapping a colleague on the back. This is the fresh start we needed, another adds. Alexander steps out of the boardroom, his face pale, his steps unsteady. The bustling office he once ruled with an iron fist now feels foreign, unwelcoming. Employees glance at him as he passes, but no one offers a word of comfort. He reaches the elevator, his reflection in the polished doors a reminder of the man he used to be and the man he's become. Back in the boardroom, David stands at the head of the table, addressing the board with calm determination. This isn't just about removing Alexander, he says. It's about restoring this company to what it once stood for. We're going to rebuild with a focus on integrity, innovation, and respect for our clients, for our employees, and for our future. The board members nod, their initial shock replaced with a sense of cautious optimism. The narrator's voice carries the moment forward. In a single day, the balance of power shifted. Alexander Graves, the man who once thought himself invincible, was brought to his knees, and David Kane, the man he cast aside, rose to take his place, not for vengeance, but for redemption. As the camera fades, it shows Alexander walking out of the building, the sun setting behind him. His steps are heavy, his gaze distant, lost in regret. The final shot is of David standing in front of the massive glass windows of the CEO's office, overlooking the city. His reflection is steady, strong, a man who rose from nothing to reclaim everything. The narrator delivers the closing line. Power can be fleeting, but integrity is lasting. Treat others with respect, for the tables of fate can turn faster than you think. The camera captures Alexander Graves walking out of the towering corporate building he once ruled. His steps are slow, his shoulders slumped, and his gaze fixed on the ground. The weight of his choices presses heavily on him, each step a reminder of what he's lost. The grandeur of the lobby, the bustling streets outside, it all feels foreign now, as if the world he once controlled has moved on without him. Alexander pauses at the entrance, glancing back at the building. For a fleeting moment, he sees himself in his prime, confident, commanding, untouchable. But the reflection in the glass doors is a stark contrast. A man defeated, burdened by his arrogance and the consequences of his actions. The narrator's voice interjects, soft but firm. Alexander Graves believed his power was absolute, that his decisions would never be challenged. But arrogance blinds even the sharpest minds. Today, he walks away from the empire he built, a man forced to confront the wreckage left behind. Inside the building, the atmosphere is completely transformed. Employees gather in the open space, their faces filled with cautious optimism. At the center of the room, standing tall and composed, is David Kane. His voice carries a calm authority, but it's laced with warmth, a stark contrast to the harsh tone they had grown accustomed to. David addresses the crowd. For years, this company lost sight of what truly matters: its people. You are the heart of Graves Enterprises, and it's time you were treated as such. Together, we're going to rebuild, not just the company's reputation, but its foundation. a foundation built on respect, innovation, and fairness. The employees exchange glances, their initial skepticism replaced by a spark of hope. David's words resonate, not as empty promises, but as a genuine commitment to change. You've endured a lot, he continues, his voice steady, but those days are over. From this moment forward, we're going to create a company we can all be proud of, a place where hard work is valued, voices are heard, and success is shared. As David finishes, the room erupts into applause. The camera pans across the faces of the employees, capturing the shift in morale. Where there was once fear and frustration, there is now a sense of unity and purpose. The screen transitions to an exterior view of the building, now glowing softly under the setting sun. The narrator's voice returns, reflective and thoughtful. Power is fleeting, but respect lasts a lifetime. Alexander Graves built an empire on control and fear, but it crumbled beneath the weight of his arrogance. David Kane, the man he underestimated and discarded, rose not to destroy, but to restore. He rebuilt what truly mattered: integrity, respect, and hope. The final shot shows Alexander walking alone down a quiet street, his figure silhouetted against the fading light. Meanwhile, David stands in the CEO's office, gazing out at the city below, a man who turned his struggles into strength and reclaimed his destiny. The narrator closes with a powerful message. Never underestimate those you look down upon, because tables can turn in ways you'd never expect.